tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, does it make a sound? Well, yeah, duh, it makes a sound. If you couldn't tell from my joke, I'm going to be talking about the Clemson Experimental Forest. As a natural resource management major, I get to spend a lot of time in the experimental forest. I have a lab there, I have creative inquiry groups that meet there, and I just like spending time there. I think that Clemson owning its own forest is a really cool trait about this school. Not many people know about it, and not many people use it to their advantage. So I'm hoping to inform you about the history of the forest, some of the research and resource opportunities available in the forest, as well as some of the recreational opportunities that the forest has to offer. I'm going to start talking about the history of the forest. The history comes from Robert Sorrells, who is a Clemson University historian. He published a 50-year history of the Clemson Experimental Forest. The forest got its origins in the 1930s during the Dust Bowl. If you can imagine standing up on top of a building here at Clemson and looking around and not seeing anything but agricultural fields. That's what Clemson once was. It wasn't these trees and forests like we have now. And the forest, the agricultural practices were so bad that the farmers essentially destroyed the land and rendered it useless. So when Franklin Roosevelt took office and started his New Deal, he purchased the land around Clemson in hopes of rehabilitating it. There's a man here at Clemson on faculty named George All, who took interest in this project by the government, and he proposed his idea to Washington to come in and restore the land, and Washington accepted it, and they gave him the power to start restoring the land to what it once was. So he started by rejuvenating streams, he started by planting trees, he built Lake Essequibo. He had all these neat projects going on to bring the land back to what it once was. And then World War II came around, and when World War II came around, the government just kind of abandoned this project. They put all their resources to the war, and Clemson stepped in and said, hey, we'll take care of the land during the war, no big deal. And as a result, Clemson ended up getting to keep the land after the war. After the war, Clemson hired a guy named Lahotsky, who was a forester. The forestry building is actually named after him today. And he started implementing forest management practices, which really helped shape the experimental forest more to what it is today. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the resources and research that goes on in the forest. A lot of this information comes from Lynn Beeson, who was a member of the faculty in Clemson back in the 1970s. She noted that the educational value of the forest was tremendous because there's a north forest and a south forest, and they're two completely different types of ecosystems. So kids can learn management practices in the north forest and the south forest, and it has a great educational advantage to them to know how to manage these two different types of forests. Thomas Straka and Knight Cox, who are both foresters here at Clemson, said the main function of the forest is for it to be multiple use. This means there's an area for research, an area for recreation, and an area for production. Today the forest is actually still in production, and that's primarily timber production. Knight Cox, in a testimony, said that the forest is a learning tool, and that the best practices are developed, evaluated, and demonstrated on the forest. The reason that the forest is still harvested and produces timber is so that the forest can support itself. The revenue it generates helps support the projects that go on in the forest. Another way the forest supports itself is in 2002, Paul Sandifer of the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources introduced this lease agreement to the forest to allow hunters to come hunt on the forest. So hunters pay money to come hunt on the forest. As a result, Clemson gets to keep part of the money. So this makes the forest a self-sustaining practice. In 2013, Knight Cox, who is the head forester of the forest, published a paper highlighting some of the research that's going on in the forest. There's research on how silviculture and timber management practices affect wildlife. There's research on how invasive species are disrupting native habitats, and engineers are even in the forest. They're wanting to know how the forest filters out the groundwater and makes it cleaner drinking water for everybody. So it's really, really diverse in what opportunities are available in the forest for resources, education, research. I'm going to talk about my favorite part now, talk mostly from personal experience. That's about the recreational opportunities in the forest. Lake Essequibo is in the forest, has a lot of really cool trails to hike on, just a lot of, you can do swimming, kayaking, boating, fishing. There's a really awesome rope swing down from the dam. I'd recommend it. kind of sketchy, but I'd recommend it. There's the George All Natural area, which is an area of the forest that has never been harvested. So you have these huge trees, it's really peaceful, there's never anyone there. You can take a hammock, read a book, spend your whole afternoon there. There's areas like Wildcat Creek, which is a really popular hike up to a waterfall, really pretty. Some of the other opportunities in the forest are there's picnicking, there's picnic areas everywhere, there's horseback riding, there's mountain biking, and there's a lot of really good wildlife viewing. An example of the wildlife viewing is like 15 minutes away from my house. I can walk there in no time. There's an active beaver pond, and I can sit around and just watch the beavers build their homes, and it's really interesting critters, and it's kind of fun to go and watch them. If I had to compare the forest to anything, I'd compare it to a giant playground for adults. There's just always a new place to explore, trees to climb, you can even play in the dirt if you're still into that. So the Clemson Experimental Forest is this really awesome resource, and not many people take advantage of it simply because they don't know about it. So hopefully I've informed you, encouraged you to get out there now, see it for yourselves, and who knows, maybe someday I'll see you out there too.